Today, we have the extraordinary Ina Jasini, a trailblazer in international criminal law and human rights, whose career spans the halls of justice from The Hague to Oxford. But Rudina's journey started in Albania, and her story is a testament to resilience, ambition, and the power of education. We'll explore how her Albanian roots shaped her path, her groundbreaking work in global justice, and her thoughts on empowering the next generation of Albanian professionals. Rodina, thank you so much for joining us today. It's an honor having you in.
Thank you so much, Zoe. It is such a pleasure to be part of the launching podcast of UKAP, and I would like to congratulate all of you at UKAP for the excellent work you are doing in promoting the values of Albanian professionals in the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Rodina. Thanks again. It's a pleasure having you in. Rodina, could you take us back to your early years in Albania? What were some of the values or experiences from your upbringing that shaped your sense of justice and ambition?
Well, I grew up in a family that nourished in me from very early on a strong sense of personal identity. My parents encouraged a sense of looking at the world through bigger lenses and not through a small window where the world looks quite big and unreachable, instead, through fostering the power of education and learning foreign languages and encourages a child's imagination, I think were like the tools to create a basis upon which I could pursue, let's say, further studies. Of course, I couldn't know back then what journey, professional or personal, one I would have. And in a way, we are subject of circumstances and conditions that shape our destiny. But I still believe that there is something in us that is like a thread from quite early starts, let's say, baby steps in our families, where certain things are deeply ingrained. I was born in a family of Cham ethnic minority of Albanians who had been expelled from Greece between the First World War and the Second World War. Although there were no conversations at the time of my grandparents talking about the suffering that their family had endured, but in many ways, and maybe in subliminal, subconscious way, this had affected my understanding of justice. My family also had been subjected to a certain treatment by the communist regime in Albania, where my parents, grandparents' house actually, but my parents lived with the grandparents at the time. For my father's side, their house had been raided 3 times by the authorities, and many of their belongings were taken. So I'd say this, in some form, had influenced my understanding of justice and the pursuit of justice as such.
Thank you, Rudina. It's interesting how the deep history of Albania of resilience and justice has shaped this view of yours. But how did growing up in that environment prepare you for working on cases like the Khmer Rouge Tribunal and the ICTY?
It is indeed that upbringing, but also I am a child of the transition part of Albania from communist to democracy, and you notice you're like a first hand witness of what the communist regime had done in Albania, actually, and the suffering, and sometimes of the untold stories. Um, I knew quite early on when I pursued my legal studies that I wanted to focus on human rights and international law as such. And in that sense, this was a guiding force to pursue further studies in the field of international criminal justice. Following my studies in the United States, I did come to The Hague to pursue an internship with the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. But at the time, it was the appeals court that adjudicated upon cases of both the ICTY but also of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. So, in that sense, I had a good sense of direction quite early on and a certain preparation, I would say, but you are not really prepared for dealing with crimes against humanity, war crimes, or genocide. And so it is a very grim area of law, but at the same time, it's an area of law that gives you the opportunity to work directly with victims of human rights, as well as even in the position of defense. You have a better understanding, being in the courtroom actually, of how certain stories are told and the narratives around certain regimes. So it's sometimes not only the big picture, but it's these small stories of individuals suffering and grief that create that strong picture of what has happened in a society or post-conflict society.
Very much so. We briefly talked about your career and what you've touched, but you've also had an incredible academic journey from Tirana to Oxford, Georgetown, and Harvard. What was it like stepping into these prestigious institutions as an Albanian student?
Tremendous privilege. For me, the Fulbright Scholarship was the opening portal to an extraordinary intellectual and personal journey. And it opens doors to new opportunities, kind of new avenues of thought, to long lasting and invaluable network of professional and personal connection, but more significantly, I would say, to a life of positive impact, social impact. When I applied for the Fulbright scholarship in Albania, I actually did not discuss this with anybody, not even my parents or my friends or anyone, because I thought it was such a far fetched idea. And most of the people that I'd heard of who got the scholarship, the Fulbright scholarship, were kind of associated with position in public administrations, were older than I was at the time. And so I applied. I got selected for the interview. The committee, which at the time was composed of the head of the USAID, which is the US Development Program under the State Department, high officials of the US Embassy, as well as other distinguished foreign scholars who were at the time working with different organizations in Albania. The incredible thing about sometimes being young and bold is that you feel like, well, you don't have anything to lose. You just go and share your view of what your professional and personal journey you envision or would like to be, and most certainly how you see yourself in Albania making an impact of whatever capacity, and how do you see Albania progressing in the future. So, in that context, this was the basis upon which I got shortlisted. Then I went through in the second round of interviews, and then I got selected by a committee in Washington, D.C. From that moment on, a new journey started for me, as I said, a new avenue of thought. Following my studies at Georgetown, I then applied for this internship at the ICTY in The Hague, which I was granted the right and the privilege to work. While I was pursuing the internship, I was encouraged by a legal officer working for the judge that I was clerking as an intern to apply for a new position that had just opened with the defense in the case of Haradinaj at the ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. That was a school in itself, because I got to see firsthand how international criminal law was practiced. Was an incredibly demanding work-wise experience. Upon completion of the trial, and the case went later on to appeals and partial retrial, which was a whole, let's say, legal process that took several years. But upon the completion of the trial, I applied for a master's program at the University of Oxford on criminal justice and criminology. I got admitted, and fortunately, I also got granted a very prestigious scholarship, the Weidenfeld Scholarship at Oxford, which was a tremendous honor. From that moment on, it's been quite a journey, Zoe, because I also went through the course of the master's program and went to work pro bono as a lawyer in Cambodia, representing victims in the first case there, and wrote my master's thesis from Cambodia. Luckily, I got a distinction which allowed my conditional offer from the University of Oxford to pursue a DPhil in law, which is a Doctor of Philosophy in law, or otherwise a PhD, as we call it more generally. And for which this distinction in the master thesis became an instrumental part, because Oxford had such a high standards for the PhD project and program. So I got admitted, and then from that moment on, I pursued 6 years of one of a kind intellectual journey of a true perseverance and dedication. So it's been quite an enriching experience, Zoe, and I will leave it with that.
Absolutely, super inspirational, and it's always so good to hear about these stories. And you are a true example of if you want, you can do it. So it's an honor, honestly, just to listen about the journey. I'm hypnotized. But as we mentioned about early on about your work and how it spans through the Khmer Rouge Tribunal, as you mentioned, the ICTY, and now the Thachi case in Kosovo. Can you share maybe a moment that was particularly challenging or meaningful in these roles?
I want to say one thing, Zoe, that relates to your very, very kind remark. I fundamentally believe that there is much stronger potential in all of us, and sometimes it's like finding the right conditions to allow the true potential to flourish. While I was writing my PhD thesis at Oxford, especially in the last 6 months before I submitted, I could say that there were times that I kind of even remarked on my own brain capacity, and I just couldn't believe that the brain could even work like that. Obviously, when we are put under certain, it is pressure, but it's also a certain condition where you need to flourish. We are at our best. So I just wanted to say beforehand, for those who are listening to us, and more particularly the young generation of students or professionals, that I think each of us has a far greater potential within us than what we think we have. It's just that how we put it into motion and how we allow it to flourish. But to answer your question, I would say that as a lawyer, quite often, whether in The Hague or in Cambodia, the architecture of the courtroom and the legal process kind of protects you from engaging directly with those who are on the receiving ends of a brutal regime, and in this case, the victims of mass atrocities. As an academic pursuing my PhD and conducting empirical research and interviews with victims of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, where I interviewed 112 victims, I went across the country over 4 months, meeting actually in a pagoda, which is a Buddhist shrine, and meeting not only those who are victims, but also survival of one of the most brutal regimes that the 20th century had known, as it was Pol Pot regime. That was extremely challenging on a psychological and emotional level. Here you are, not as a lawyer in a courtroom, but as a researcher and academic, conducting research and hoping to be as objective as you can be in gaining answers that will be important for your thesis. But at the same time, you had points where saying, what am I actually doing for these people? Like, I'm not changing their life in any significant ways. All I could do, I can only hope to give voice and to their suffering and grief. And so, in addition to individual meetings, I also had focus group meetings, as we called it, with a number of victims, and that was extremely powerful. Quite soon after I conducted the interviews, so after 4 months, I realized that this had impacted me psychologically and emotionally, and I had to take a few months off time from going through the interviews and the content of the transcribed interviews to see them with a fresh eye, but also to allow myself to detach emotionally, because you become subjectively involved. uh, their stories had landed in me. And so to allow for that objectivity to be in place, it was a difficult process. And I considered that quite challenging, but at the same time, so rewarding at the end, because I had an opportunity in 2016 when I received a very important, but also I was very honored to receive a fund from one of the UK research councils, recognizing my findings from my research, to go back to Cambodia in 2016 and have all the victims I had interviewed in one room and share with them my research findings in their own language, in Khmer language. So that to me was um, a very challenging organic process where I learned so much through the process myself, but at the same time, very rewarding experience.
Super interesting. Thank you for sharing. You are also a Vanderbilt scholar at Oxford. How did that opportunity shape your career, and how important do you think scholarships and mentorships are for young Albanians trying to reach similar heights? Of course, you just mentioned this episode in 2016, which really pushed through with your studies, but in general, to young Albanians trying to reach similar heights, such as you have done incredibly, how important do you think they are?
The Weidenfeld Scholarship was an extraordinary opportunity because it was a leadership scholarship, and there were only 30 of us who were uh, granted and were given this scholarship based on our potential as leader. And that doesn't necessarily mean political leaders, but means leader in whatever field and discipline you work on. One particular feature of the Weidenfeld Scholarship, which was named after the late Lord Weidenfeld, is that you had an opportunity of networking with philanthropists and people who had actually shaped uh, politically, economically, socially, and culturally the United Kingdom, France, as well as Germany. So there was something that was far greater than just a scholarship. And with that, it was a platform through which we were invited to meet distinguished individuals in their respective fields. And I benefited tremendously from the Weidenfeld Scholarship. And I am very honored to consider myself a Weidenfeld Scholar. And I hope to give true value to the name of the Weidenfeld Scholarship, but also the philanthropic work of the late Lord Weidenfeld. In terms of mentorship, I am without a doubt a product of very good mentorship, and all of us, I think, through the courses of or through the course of our studies, work, encounter sometimes individuals who believe in us, who see a potential, and who are willing to encourage you, to motivate you. And I think there is a great value in mentorship. I myself participate in 3 mentorship programs, and one of them is actually in Kosovo. You'd be surprised, but a few years back, somebody who had an initiative that was called Dare to Dream, a lady from Belgium had set up this initiative, and for whatever reason, she had decided that Albania would be among 6 countries that she was spreading this mentorship program. And out of the blue, I received an invitation from a foreigner, a northern Albanian, to ask me to go to Albania and meet in a school in Paskujan, where they had brought together girls of the age between 14 to 18, and to share my stories, to engage and interact with them, as well as listen to them. And I found that extremely powerful. I thought more and more programs like this should take place. It could be not just a talking, but it could be building a bridge between individuals who have established themselves as professionals somewhere, have had a journey, and I would not call it, well, maybe a successful journey, but more so a meaningful journey, a journey that has created some impact in their community and society, to share that with younger people who are full of aspirations and full of dreams.
I would like to ask Rudina, thanks for that. In these high pressure environments, how do you stay true to yourself and your Albanian roots? Do you have a way where you try and just merge within the community or the people you're talking to, or you just keep up and always present your Albanian roots and remark them, let's say?
I'm a very proud Albanian. I believe that the way I see any experience is, of course, shaped by my multi layered and multi factored societies, environments have been in. And so I would say that the way I operate under pressure, it's first of all, you should be at a stage where you are prepared. You are a professional who has achieved a certain status through your work. People recognize the values of the work that you bring into any environment or any discipline. And so, how you assert yourself in an environment depends greatly also how well prepared you are. And I think it would be very difficult for someone you can bring directly from Albania and to work in international criminal tribunal. Of course, they can, but it just you have sometimes to read the room. You have to understand the cultural diversity. To so we become product of the environment that shape us. So how I hold on? Well, I'm not saying that we don't break under pressure. There have been circumstances where there is a higher level of sensitivity you have towards an issue or a discussion, but you have a voice as a professional, and there you have also humility in accepting other people's view, listening, and also responding with what you believe is the right answer or the right approach given the situation.
Rudina, thank you so much for that. We touched about mentoring, and for us at UKAP Foundation, the mentoring and social mobility is extremely important, and we really push on people to benefit through this. What advice would you give to young Albanians looking to navigate international careers themselves?
Well, indeed, the mentorship is a great way to allow people of the same discipline, but not only to foster a greater sense of cooperation through this mentorship program. And I'm very pleased to learn that UCAP it's a great basis to foster that kind of program. But in terms of encouraging young Albanians to have an international career, I would say that there is not a clear cut path. Like it really depends on us, especially law is very territorial in terms of as a discipline. To become a lawyer, you need to qualify a lawyer within a certain jurisdiction. Then only certain parts of the law relate to international law. But this is just my discipline more generally, I would say. We live in a globalized world. There are more and more opportunities in whatever discipline to engage and to cooperate with people from different countries. But also, I think dare to move on. Like if you want to move to a new country and work within the same field, just sometimes you have to have the courage to get out of the comfort zone and do it. Um, it's hard to say because we all carve a very individual journey, individual path to get somewhere. And the process is far more organic. It's not that when you are 18, you know exactly where you will end up being in 10, 20 years from there. All you know is that there is sometimes a guiding light that takes you to certain, you know that when an opportunity comes your way, that's your call, and that I call the carpe diem, the ability to understand that that is your call. And from that moment on, I mean, it's totally okay even to pursue, one profession being in one place. I'm not saying that people should move around from country to country, but for those who want to pursue an international career, I think the opportunities are there really.
I agree with you totally. In regards to mentoring, have you had the chance to mentor others, especially Albanians in this case? And what do you hope they take away from your guidance?
In fact, as I said, I'm part of a mentorship project in Kosovo. Quite often, I'm so impressed with the different initiatives that flourish out of Kosovo, and it makes it look Albania, motherland Albania, because we're all Albanians, a little bit lacking behind in that regard. It is very impressive, really, to see young people who are so willing and full of aspirations to pursue their dreams. And for me, it's been a two-way process. Yes, I've been on the mentor's seat and I've shared views, and sometimes I've read when they have applied for different programs, their statements or cover letters, or even to have a discussion sometimes, because not always people have a very clear understanding of what they're going to pursue. Sometimes they need a little bit of nudging by opening up and then listening to themselves speak about these ideas. And that to me has been really an interesting two-way process. I too have learned from new things, sometimes like even in the field of technology that I'm not very well versed, because it's not my field and the technology is developing with such a fast pace. So I find it really, really interesting. And the interdisciplinary approach to studies, which I deeply encourage it.
I couldn't agree more. For those listening who dream of following in your footsteps, what are three skills or qualities they should focus on to excel in international law and human rights?
Well, this is indeed a difficult question, because it's not that you need to have a set of qualities or skills. Yes, you need to have very good academic preparation, first of all, to have been through good education, to show great motivation for the field. So you have to embark on certain initiatives that go beyond the interest of Dina wanting to excel and to become, a lawyer in this field. You have to show that your motivation or your interests are subscribed to a greater value that is beyond you. So you are contributing to the discipline, to the community. I remember when I was doing my PhD, and basically my friends who were working in law firms, having very good salaries and having more of a professional life. And here I am struggling with something. But what drives you towards the finish line, it is really the belief that you are contributing to the discipline. Your work, whatever is that, research or even like professional work, it's resting on the shoulders of giants, we say, like of people who have paved the road for you, and you are just pushing that knowledge to further heights. So in that sense, just basically, I would say that there is not a set skills that one form fits them all, but you need to have a very good sense of what you really, really want and how you work towards it. Uh, then the journey that you carve is your own individual personal journey.
I couldn't agree more. Your work often involves amplifying the voice of victims. Also, as you mentioned, especially with your PhD in Cambodia and the following of the ICTY. How do you connect with victims across cultures? And does your Albanian heritage give you a unique perspective?
This is a very interesting question, Zoe. I don't know, and I can't give you a clear answer, what motivated me to go and conduct research in a country that is as far removed from Europe and more so Albania, such as Cambodia. But I kind of challenged myself, wanting to explore a new culture, a new society, to better understand the needs and the rights of victims of the Khmer Rouge. So, in that context, you may find this a little bit amusing that I had to bring food for the Buddha before I conducted any of the interviews. And thankfully, the local people there, in this case, my interpreter, was also my cultural guide, basically said that in their tradition and in their culture, you had to meet in a pagoda, which had become a meeting place not only of the victims and survivors, but also as a place to honor the memory of those lost. And then, as out of respect, you had to bring food to the statue of Buddha, which I did that for 4 months, to be honest with you, before we had any conversation. But one particular thing from Albanian values and traditions that became handy, I would say, is how you approach the elderly. So the conversations in a focus group meetings always started with the elderly, and how respectful I needed to be to not interrupt, even though I had a set of questions in mind and all of them, to allow them to tell their stories. So you have to build a rapport, first and foremost. Victims don't owe me anything. Actually, I'm asking them to be in an uncomfortable position to dig deep into their pain and their past to share with me their story. And so, in that sense, it was very much, I would say, not only a learning experience, but a profound um, space for me to grow as a researcher and academic, but as also as a human.
Wow. Um, that is super interesting. What would you say your biggest lesson that you've learned about working in an international setting has been?
That no matter uh, which society, victims all have such recognizable features that the suffering is manifested in similar ways, that their needs are not that different despite that the cultures could be different. But victims at the end want a sense of justice, a sense of truth, and allowing them to have the necessary platform to tell their story. There is a paramount need for a victim of mass atrocity to be heard, to tell their story on their own terms. And so, as a lawyer specialized in this field, I would say that this to me has been a profound lesson. And also, it has allowed me to have a better understanding, a more in depth understanding, no matter where, whether you're in Africa or in Asia, and to be more tuned to victims' needs. Like, I don't think I would have had these insights or these views being inside Albania, to be honest with you. It's these experiences that have shaped and has broadened my horizon and the way I see the world, and more so of the field that I work in.
Thank you, Rudina. Touching on the diaspora power, the Albanian diaspora is thriving in the UK and certainly beyond. How can organizations like the UKAP Foundation harness this energy to create a meaningful change?
I think UKAP already is doing a fantastic work in harnessing not only the values of the professionals, Albanian professionals in the UK, but fostering all forms of cooperation. I mean, I attended recently a fantastic gala that was organized by UCAP, and everyone should be very proud of that. To see successful, inspiring Albanians and inspiring women, if I could in some ways distinguish women in this case. Not that I want in any way to compare, but it's so humbling to see so many young people and so inspiring at the same time. So I think UCAP is doing a fantastic work. And I know that in the United States, and particularly in New York, there are so many organizations there. And there is a very strong sense of the diaspora in the United States. And it was very interesting because I'm British, but I'm not American. And at some point, they had this program of successful Albanian American success stories. And initially I thought like, but I've only studied here. Yes, I've been to Harvard for 1 year. I was at the NYU Center for Human Rights and Global Justice for 2 years. I studied at Georgetown. So I've had my own exposure to the United States and the American way of thinking and doing things, but I'm not American. So I said like, but it was this really outreach program that and very energetic organizations in the United States. I think in general we could think of ways to foster cooperation between countries and between continents. So we are all Albanians, we are all striving to bring the best values we can in our respective societies. So the best way we could do that is by building bridges of communication, of mentorship, of sharing insights and ideas, and bring value really.
Thank you. Thank you, Rodina. I would like to also touch on legacy and vision. So I'm very curious. You're a senior lecturer at Oxford, an ESRC fellow, a defense counsel at The Hague. What's next for you? And are there any dream projects or goals on your horizon?
I want to finish my book, but the current work that I'm doing as a defense counsel in the Taci case at the Kosovo Specialist Chambers in The Hague, representing Recep Selini. It's a full time work, very demanding. And when I defended my thesis at Oxford, I was strongly recommended by my examiners that what you have written should be a book, that you should not have such a big ego to keep everything and all the knowledge to yourself. The importance of an academic's work should be disseminating your knowledge out there. So I have a project proposal and a book contract. So I want to publish my book that is based on my work on the participation of victims of mass atrocities as civil parties in international criminal proceedings.
All the best of luck with it. As the UKA Foundation will be first line supporting it, reading it, and we can't wait for it to come out. How do you see Albania's growing role on the global stage, particularly into international law and human rights?
Albania, and I mean the state of Albania, but also the state of Kosovo, are part of certain organizations and forums, Albania more so. So whether it is at the United Nations, and we should not forget that a year ago Albania was a member of the Security Council, temporary member, and that allowed Albania to push forward certain agendas on human rights and international law that Albanians believe. But I think you have not only a state involvement, but you can have a certain contribution on an individual level. People like myself, and I know that there are other individuals who are Albanian working, including the International Criminal Court, who, on whatever capacity, are actually making an impact and giving their contribution to the field. So this is how I see it. So you can have several layers of contribution. You can have on a state level, you can have on organizational level, but you can have it also on an individual level.
Thank you, Rodina. What would you say to conclude to the young Albanians listening today, dreaming big but unsure how to take the first step?
I believe that the true success and meaning of whatever journey you embark is achieved when whatever you pursue in your professional sphere has an impact not only on your discipline or on you as a person, but also on the community as a whole, and simply have a positive impact on the society. This has been the cornerstone of my sense of orientation as an individual, of the way I lead my life. And if I could share this as a virtue or as an insight to others, this would be it.
Rodina, thank you so much for that. I have a few quick fire round questions just to conclude it in a fun way. One word to describe your Albanian roots.
Family, I would say a fierce loyalty to family and deep respect for tradition.
What would be the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Live a life of full intellectual curiosity and never stop learning. There is no better catalyst to a successful and meaningful life than curiosity. And equally important, lead a life of gratitude and humility.
Dream for Albania in 10 years.
To become a functioning democracy with check and balance of powers, where principles of parliamentarism and constitutionality govern the society.
You've traveled a lot. What would you say the most misunderstood thing about Albanians' international arena is?
There are several misconceptions about Albanians that often arise from stereotypes, historical misunderstandings, or just simply lack of knowledge. But I say sometimes, a misunderstanding would be cultural backwardness, as if Albania were to be this really socially or culturally backward country. But this is for people who have never been to Albania or have not learned about Albania, or and also the criminal stereotypes. There is a stereotype there that associates Albanians with organized crime. But like in many countries, I believe that there are instances of criminal activity. This is in no way representative of the entire populations. I believe that many Albanians are law-abiding citizens wherever they live in.
If you could represent one historical Albanian figure in court, who would it be?
I don't wish on representing any Albanians in court, to be
Fair enough.
honest. But I've already worked in the legal representation of Albanian statesmen and political figures, both at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and now at the Kosovo Specialist Chambers in The Hague.
What would you say is more challenging? This is quite an interesting question. An international tribunal or convincing an Albanian family to change their mind about something?
Certainly, an international criminal tribunal defending someone charged with crimes against humanity and war crimes or genocide. It is an immense legal challenge that takes incredible preparation, determination, and perseverance.
I think after this similarity and metaphor, all the Albanians have understood how hard your job and your figure is to a daily basis. Would you prefer coffee with Giersch Fishta or a courtroom debate with Faik Konica?
Can it be both, perhaps? Imagine for a second having had a legal and intellectual exchange with Faik Konica in a courtroom, and then you go afterwards to enjoy a more relaxed and in-depth conversation with George Fish. I think that would make for an incredible day, if you ask me.
Here is where earlier you mentioned your constant thirst of intellectual enrichment comes up. So we'll take the answer. What's a book or resource you think every Albanian professional should read?
I read a few years ago a book that really had a lasting impression on me. It was the Thinking Fast and Slow, which was written by Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman, which delves into the two thinking systems that drive our decision making processes. And so I found that very interesting. But one particular book that captured my mind, my whole existence when I was reading, and maybe because of where we were coming from, was 1984 by George Orwell.
And what would be a dream initiative you'd like to see UKAP launch?
We mentioned mentorship, and I know that this is something that UCAP is really focused on, but I think that would be one program that I would very much stress on, because it allows for far greater cooperation and building a bridge from people for people who are within the same discipline or interdisciplinary approaches. I think that would be fantastic if you keep it up and make it stronger as a program.
Definitely. And we're working really hard. And we're super glad to have your continuous support in this. If you could bring one Albanian value to the world, what would it be?
I think it is widely accepted that Albanians are well known about the peaceful coexistence among the believers of different religious communities in the country. And I think we sometimes take that for granted, but it's tremendous value. Like when you live in other societies and you see how separate, people conduct their lives according to their religions. Albania is a fantastic place to grow up as a child without any such influences. And I think it's a true value, this religious harmony.
Rina, thank you so much. Your story was, is, and I think will be an inspiration for many, not just to Albanians, but to anyone striving to make a global impact while also staying true to their roots. I want to thank you personally, but also I would like to speak on behalf of the whole UKAP Foundation to thank you for sharing and thanking you for sharing your journey with us. To all our listeners, I would like to encourage you to go and explore the UKAP's mentorship and scholarship program to follow your dreams, just like Rodina did. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zoe. It has been a true pleasure and a privilege for me. And as I said, I congratulate all of you at UCAP for the amazing work you are doing. Thank you very much.